Welcome to the Wicked Podcast, where we read the business books you don't have the time for. I'm Marcus Kirsch.
And I'm Troy Norcross.
And we are your co-hosts for the Wicked Podcast.
So, a monopoly in the air where they can psychologically abuse people and try to extract value because they can't make money from the actual ticket. You had to drop Ryanair into the conversation, didn't you? Didn't you?
Because I like to make you angry, and you perform really well when you're angry.
Well, I'm at least passionate. If I'm not angry, I'm at least passionate.
Okay, fine. We can settle on passionate. Fine.
Well, what I can tell you, though, is I flew from London to Lisbon to Paris to Gothenburg to Amsterdam to Lisbon, and I didn't fly a single flight on the R airline.
Even sailed. So
and I went sailing.
It was all planes, trains, and automobiles for you, wasn't it?
It was. But enough of my fabulous travel life. Who's on the show?
So today we have Thales Teixeira and his book Unlocking the Customer Value Chain. So he's been is a lecturer something over at the Harvard Business School.
10 years at Harvard Business School, probably more than just a lecturer.
Really smart man. And we are talking to him about customer value chain and innovation in particular, and sort of some of the ideas about technology being not a driver for that. It's really interesting. Here's a mindset shift. But what were your takeaways?
Well, I've got two takeaways. And the first one, unfortunately for our listeners, we actually talked about after we stopped recording. And it's this whole idea that if you put too many people in a big corporation into the decision process and you have too many rounds of discussions, everything gets watered down and it becomes this recipe for mediocrity. What I liked about it was he said he'd done that with a bank in Brazil. He let them go through their entire process and then showed them that they'd made this kind of flavorless soup, I think he called it. I was like, okay, that's really good, which means that people can indeed wake up and see what they're doing and push more to the extremes and make something interesting and exciting once they know they're making flavorless soup. The other one was this whole idea. I always talk about value exchange. It's part of my kind of ecosystem that I talk about, the business ecosystem plan, or the BEP. And he's like, I don't have the words value exchange in my book. And I'm like, okay, that's good. I'm glad you don't. What do you have in your book? So he talks about value erosion, value creation, and value capture. And he lays it out really, really nicely that most startups are 110% focused on value creation, knowing they will find a time to do value capture later. Whereas most big businesses are constantly focused on value capture, revenue. Oh yeah, if we accidentally create some value along the way, that's nice, as long as it doesn't cost us too much. So those are my two takeaways. What about you?
So in general, I quite liked, which is pretty much a starting point in the book, which is the whole thing about, technology actually doesn't drive innovation. And I know we talked about that in the past, and I'm sure I talked about to other people about that because, a couple of years back when I was still in the middle of innovation teams and running innovation projects, and now it's all about transformation and still driving innovation to some sense because everyone wants to have a pillar of innovation in their company. And everyone's still thinking that, well, we drive that through technology, right? And he's like saying, no, it's not. And so the nice thing there is essentially halfway. No, it's not a quote, but it's right in there saying, I think you're only innovating if you're actually shifting your business model. If your business model stays the same, you're probably not really innovating. You're just upgrading your tech stack. You're making things a bit more nicer for your customers. You're not going to be more competitive either, and likely, therefore, you're not even getting close to innovating. So actually, shifting your business model is one of the things. So I quite like that.
Before you go on to the next one, I wrote a Medium article probably 5 years ago, the 4 I's, which were innovation, ideation, invention, and improvement. And each of the 4 of them means something slightly different. You're improving an existing process. It's just incremental improvement. Ideation is just marketing people sitting around on brightly colored beanbags and throwing whoopee cushions around. Invention is the R&D people in the white lab coats. But true innovation is going out and talking to customers and doing things that are incrementally different in business model. So I totally agree with your point. Now
Yeah,
to your
exactly.
second second
And I
insight.
think it also draws back a couple of echoes from Bill Schmarzer when he said, like, there's a difference between, digitization and digital transformation. Digitization is just basically polishing up your box, and digital transformation is you're gonna start doing things differently. And I think it's one of those things which is just a step change. Sounds similar, might mean the same thing or similar things to people, but actually, if we look at it, makes a bloody difference. And that also gets me, I think, to my last point that I'm nearly losing now, and I think I've just literally lost it.
Look
Jesus.
behind the sofa. I'm sure the idea is somewhere behind the sofa.
I don't own a sofa. I know you
Oh!
keep telling me this, like, Marcus, let me give you some money, buy a sofa. So I think the other thing is really to um when he looked at big companies and said, like, yeah, you talked about the soup as well, and I think the step change and not being scared and being brave about it. I really lost my point. I'm sorry, I lost it. Okay, you know what?
So
I
just
gotta be.
edit it
I
out.
gotta be. I gotta be honest here to our audience, and I'm not
Well,
gonna
we're
be like a
always
big
honest.
organization. I'm gonna say, look, I have no answers right here. I don't have a second point unless I get it in the next two
Well,
seconds.
I know what let's do. I know. Let's go and talk to Thales and get you out of this mess.
Exactly. Let's pick it up there because I know it's in there. I remember it's in there, but I don't remember what it is. But it felt good. Let's go there. Before the interview, a quick word from our very first sponsor, Zencaster. We use Zencaster for all our audio and video recording, and it's a very nifty tool that splits up all the channels for very easy editing. Zencaster is used by 10% of all active podcasts. You can get 40% off the first 3 months and unlimited audio and video recordings with our special coupon code wickedpodcast. I repeat, Wicked Podcast for 40% off. And now the interview. Hello, everyone. Today we're here with Thales Teixeira. Hello, Thales. Thanks for making time for us and welcome to the show.
Thank you, Marcus. It's a pleasure to be here.
Lovely. And as usual, we start at the top. So please tell our listeners who you are and why you wrote the book.
My name is Thales Teixeira. I am the CEO and co-founder of decoupling.co. It's a digital disruption and transformation agency. Me and my team, we try to help both large companies do a digital transformation as well as startups in advising them to disrupt markets. I've been a faculty at the Harvard Business School for 10 years, and I was full-time until 2019 from '09 when I graduated with a PhD at the University of Michigan. At the Harvard Business School, I taught a number of courses and did a lot of research in e-commerce and digital disruption and in this area that I've called the economics of attention. I have websites for all of this content. Right now, I live in Southern California, a little town called La Jolla. I decided to move from Boston to give a better quality of life for my family and I.
And tell us about why did you write this book and why now?
Sure. So the book was basically the result of the last 6 or 7 years of research that I did at the Harvard Business School. And it started even before I never had the pretense of writing a book, but the first startup that I ever visited was called Facebook. I'm sure you're aware of it. And I visited when it was a small company. They invited me to give a talk about viral advertising, viral marketing in 2010. I saw Mark Zuckerberg coding in his flip-flops, standing up. And basically, I gave my presentation. And then I asked them, like, what are you guys doing? How are you going to try to disrupt the social media space? And they basically told me a story of what they were trying to do. They didn't hide any of it. And I just wrote down all of what I heard, and then I moved on. And about a year and a half later, I was invited to give a talk at Airbnb, and I asked them, how are you guys trying to disrupt the hospitality industry? And they told me basically what they were trying to do. And I visited, gave a presentation, and then asked the same set of questions to Netflix executives and other big and small startups in Silicon Valley and in Boston with Wayfair, wrote many cases. And every time I started listening, very similar aspects. They talked very little about the technology, and they talked about business models. They talked about what they're trying to do. The approach, they said, oh, we're doing something very different from all of our other competitors. But the more I listened and traveled, the more I started seeing the same themes, the same concepts and ideas of business model transformation applied to different industries. And I started presenting these ideas to my students, to former alumni of the Harvard Business School. And they started telling me, like, I want to read more. I loved the method, the framework. I want to read more. And I said, well, that's too bad. I have a few cases, I have a few articles, but that's what you have to do. And until one day they kept telling me, pestering me to say, you got to write a book, you got to write a book, or I got to write a book. And then an agent came to me and saying, hey, here's the way to write a book. I will get you the publishing company and all these things. So the book came as a consequence of many people asking me to compile all of my lessons and learnings into one physical structure called the book. And that was the genesis of unlocking the customer value chain.
Wonderful. And I think, so you mentioned it just there already, and that was one of my first questions, is that, we work for a lot of larger organizations who all want to be more modern, and so a lot of anything from startups to the big global ones. And they're still very stuck, even after, let's say, 20 years of internet being there, or more than 20 years, really, if we talk about it. And there's still a lot of focus on technology and thinking innovation through technology. And you make quite a point out of that. It's like technology is just not the disruptor that we think it is. So can you tell us a little bit more about that you started mentioning just earlier? Why is technology not a disruptor? What else is the disruptor from your point of view?
Sure. So that's a great question, Marcus, and that's something I grappled with in the beginning, even before there were words on the page of my book, because I would talk to many executives, I would talk to my colleagues at Harvard Business School, I would talk to consultants, and they were very focused on technology, innovative technologies, disruptive technologies. But when I visited all these startups, they talked very little about technology. They talked about the kind of their business model as the way that they were growing and stealing customers, disrupting markets by stealing customers from established companies. And so I saw that there was a gap between all this, prophesizing of innovative technologies and what startups were doing. And as I started learning more and more, understanding more and more, I realized first, technology is important, but it is not the main driver of digital disruption, right? What I was seeing that was going on is first, there were a set of consumers in any market, hospitality, auto markets, in media, in healthcare, education, and they were just like, they weren't fully satisfied with the companies that they were doing business with, these established companies. And for many, many years, they've been voicing their concerns without many changes. But then they started changing their behavior as a function of changing their needs. And that gave rise to opportunities. And startups just identify these opportunities much quicker and build products and services differently with a different business model to that end. And they started capturing all of these consumers that were unhappy. And do they use technologies? Oh, you bet. You cannot say that technology is not important. Nobody would ever say nowadays. But they use technology as a different way, right? They use technology as a motor to something. They have an engine of growth, and they use technology as a way to accelerate that growth. And they always figure out the business model first. First, who are the customers that are unhappy? Why are they unhappy? Let's solve their unhappiness, create a business model around creating value for these customers and figuring out a way to capture value. And then once it works for a few customers, they say, now let's put in technology and kind of speed things up. That's the way Uber did, right? Uber looked at people were unhappy with taxes, unhappy with having to buy cars and having to rent cars, having to pay for the insurance and have their cars just sitting idle for most of the day. Now there's research that shows in the US, 94% of the time of an average car is spent parked Only 6% of the time a car is running. So from that point of view, Uber and other startup entrepreneurs said the world doesn't need more cars. The world just needs a better allocation of the available cars. And so then they brought in technology. They brought in GPS. They brought in apps. They brought in all of these things. But that wasn't their key competitive differentiation. And by the way, the vast majority of the technologies that these businesses use, they're off-the-shelf technologies. They're not innovative in a sense that they only possess. We have a sense of this because we look at Apple. We look at their proprietary technologies and Google's proprietary technologies. And they do have disruptive technologies, these businesses that other companies don't have access to. But by and large, when you eliminate a few handful of big tech companies, the hundreds of thousands of startups that are really changing the business world today, they have off-the-shelf technologies. They have technologies that any major company can easily, quickly have access to, buy or build. What these startups are doing is they have an innovative business model, and kind of that is what, in my view, my book tries to say as the real driver of digital disruption.
Okay, so I've got two questions here. The first question is all about the fact that it's not about the tech. That's great. A lot of investors want to know, what is the barrier to entry? How are you going to prevent either another startup from doing exactly what you're doing, or some big tech company with deep pockets from coming along and doing the same thing? And it seems to me your answer is it's not about the tech, it's about the business model. But is there another angle on the competitive advantage side of things?
Look, in reality, when you think as an academic like I do, and then helping businesses, if you think conceptually, just conceptually about the idea of a startup, right? An idea about Dollar Shave Club taking 40% of the market share of Gillette, this like 100-year-old company that is a monopoly in shaving products, right? An idea of Airbnb, these guys that knew nothing about the hotel industry, having created in less than 10 years a company that has more rooms booked than all the top 3 major hotels. Like theoretically, this should not exist. Why? Because these guys don't have the experience. They were never in this industry, just like Uber was never in this industry. Right? These guys don't have the money. Initially, they don't have the money to compete with many hotel chains and all of these big companies. Over time, they end up getting the money, but initially they don't. They don't have the experience. They don't have the money. They don't have the better people. They don't have the resources. There's no theoretical reason why a startup that has none of these resources should eventually dominate a market that other companies have all these resources. Yet, in reality, there's many startups, and we've seen that they've grown to dominate and disrupt markets. So how do you reconcile the fact that in principle they shouldn't, but eventually we have quite a few examples? And my answer to this kind of conundrum is the startups, they figure out something very small to focus all their efforts in. They figure out one small service activity product that they can do. And the other companies, they're doing lots of things at the same time, right? So to give an example, let's take a look at this a company that I've explained in my book called Birchbox. It was founded by Harvard Business School students.
Mm-hmm.
And Birchbox were just women, young women, that's saying, I'd like to understand what new and innovative products are in the beauty space, but I don't have time to go to the Sephora store and let them put the makeup, put on the creams on, and take like a few hours of my week to do that, go to the store. So I need to sample these beauty products before I buy them, because that's important, but I want to do it in the convenience of my own home. So they created a startup that puts samples of beauty products in a box and ships it to consumers at $10 a month. Now, what is Birchbox's innovation? Is it creating new beauty products? No. Is it marketing beauty products? No. Is it helping consumers figure out what they want to buy? Maybe. Is it selling the full-size items for them? Not initially. Is it doing all of these other things that Sephora has to do? No. Birchbox focused on one problem. I need to sample beauty products, and I do not want to go to the store. I need convenience, and so the beauty samples come to my house. And Birchbox just focused on this one activity in what I call the customer value chain. The customer value chain are the series of activities that customers are required to do in order to acquire, use, and dispose of the products and services that they need. And if I am a man or a woman, I need to go through this process. I need to go to the store. I need to look at options. I need to compare. I need to test it. I need to buy one and see if I like it, take it home, use it a few times. And if I like it, I need to replenish it, right? And so on and so forth. These are all activities in my customer value chain as a user of beauty products. And Sephora helps you with all of them, but it's not as good in each little thing. And Birchbox realized that Sephora didn't really help me that well in the activity of sampling beauty products. Now, Sephora could have done that. It had all of the database of its most loyal customers. It knew what they wanted. It had the free samples from manufacturers, and it could put them in a box and send to you as a subscription, yet they did not do it. It took two women from Harvard that had no business, no experience in this industry to create this business, and they kind of launched in a few years. They got 1 million subscribers.
So it's really interesting because I think there's so many things in here that ring really well. And one thing usually I like to say is, like, you look at this and, a lot of these startups exist and were successful because they removed middlemen in the chain and made things more convenient, cheaper, whatever, faster. But what you're talking about right now is, and I'm in a project right now, and I've probably been in the situation in every project in the last 3, 4, 5 years. The view on reality, right? So a lot of bigger companies, you say Sakura, or you can pick any industry really, seem to run through the idea that, okay, if I want to grow, I have to hit the masses, and the masses have to be all cookie cutter. So if I go cookie cutter, then I can reduce my costs on each customer, and therefore I'll grow as cheap as possible and I reach everyone, right? What then happens is everyone gets the box standard stuff that nobody wants anymore. We're living in a world of, personalized industrialization, not just general industrialization anymore, right? So the whole mass production thing is very old. It's not a margin anymore. We'll talk about margins in a bit. Is it therefore that big companies are just really losing or maybe ignoring reality too much and these kind of more specific customer stories, and therefore they're really missing out on the more qualitative, higher margin, bigger customer value? How are they missing that? How are they missing reality like all these startups do?
Mm-hmm.
Why do you think that is seemingly baked into a lot of classic organizations, that they're totally missing that trick?
Mm-hmm. So many big companies are my clients, and I always like to ask them, just let me sit in, fly in the wall in your decisions of what products to launch, what new products and services to launch. And I just sit in and observe. I don't want to change any of their process. I want to understand what it is. And I've done that for apparel companies, law firms. I've done it for auto manufacturers, electronic devices. And basically the story goes like this. Where are big opportunities for us? Where are markets, untapped markets? But they have to be big. If it's very small, we don't want it because we're very big. And by the way, what products can we bring into those markets? And it has to be low cost for us, but the customer has to pay a lot. So we have to have high margins, because if it's not profitable, we don't want to go in. And by the way, we have to use our resources to our advantage. We don't want to go into a game. It's sort of like blackjack and poker. People in Las Vegas, they don't want to go in a game that they don't have advantage if they have much more money. They want to be able to kind of use their money to their advantage, their resources. So in the process of doing so, the approach is a very firm-centric approach to innovation. What is good for me? What can I make money? What can I grow? What can I use my advantages? It's me, 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 me. And by the way, I want to use all my resources to beat out the competition. Now, when you contrast this to the startup, and I've sat in startup meetings and I just observed, how do they make decisions? Are they going for big mass markets? No, they're small. They don't have ability to tackle mass markets, and the mass markets is a bloodbath anyway. Are they trying to figure out what can they be profitable? Not really. They're trying to figure out what are opportunities. What are customers unsatisfied with? Because that's the easiest way to capture a customer. They're unhappy. We're offering something new, something better, something different, and so it's easier to acquire customers. So startups are very firm centric, customer centric in that regards. They look at what our customers unhappy with, and that's why I brought in the concept of the customer value chain. Because my colleague in 1985, Michael Porter, he came out with the value chain of the firm. What are these activities that firms do that enable them to be profitable? I said, what are these activities that customers do that they're unhappy with in the market? They have to do it. And so startups are taking really this firm centric, this customer centric approach, identifying customer problems in the process of going through their customer value chain. So that's point number one. Point number two, the big companies are trying to do everything at the same time. They do many things. In the process of doing many things, they do a few things that are not as well. And I can name you some of the best companies in the world that are huge, that they have poor service or products in a specific aspect of the customer value chain. The startups, they focus all their eggs in one basket. They're like, in the beginning, we need to get this right. And they put all their people in. And if they don't succeed, they don't create value for the customer, they die. So they have a huge motivation. What do the executives do? Oh, we have jobs, we have careers. If this thing doesn't work, it's fine. My career, I just want to make sure that my career is fine. So no harm, no foul. So these things change. And when you look at the series of innovations or products that are launched by big companies and by startups, they're worlds apart because they're just completely different mindsets and different processes to decide what to launch or not. So I think that's kind of goes into this direction of understanding that startups are taking a very different approach from big companies, and different processes result in different outcomes, and that kind of explains a lot the entry strategy of many of these startups before they undertake the big companies in the market.
So you've described half of what the little kind of challenge is, which is launching new products. I personally think there's a bigger challenge, which is the established product in the big company, where they feel like they've got their customers locked in. They're holding their customers, somehow prisoner. I've got a printer, it will only use my ink, you can't go anywhere else. There's only one cable system, you've got to buy all my cable channels and my internet and my mobile phone because you've got nowhere else. And wherever there is that kind of lock-in feeling creates some of this unhappiness that startups, whether it's Uber or Airbnb or Birchbox, say, oh, wow, unhappy customer with existing product or service. Why is it, and it's an obvious thing for me, but why is it in your view that big companies don't want to kill the golden goose and transform their own product before the startup disrupts them?
Yeah, I think you just answered partially your own question, right? First, by naming it the golden goose. The golden goose is extremely valuable. It's a easy stream of revenue for big companies. So money is coming in, but at the same time, you also said something. There's a tension that builds up. Customers are unhappy, but they have no alternative. It's like an earthquake, right? The earthquake, if you're able to measure the tension between layers of rock, you see it getting stronger. This energy, this pent up energy that is about to explode in the form of earthquake is accumulating. But as you also said, as executives are making these decisions, they look a lot from their point of view. I am an employee and we're making all this money and this is guaranteed, and we've been doing that for a while.
Or they think it's guaranteed, but it's not guaranteed.
Until when? The question is, until when is this guaranteed? But it's coming in. A lot of money is coming in with very little effort. Coca-Cola doesn't require a lot more effort to sell Coca-Cola. It's just been, the locomotive has been running steady state for a long, long time. And then this tension builds up and they say, there's an opportunity here. But the opportunity is very uncertain, is very risky. It might have a negative impact on my career. And so the decision becomes, by and large, let's preserve the golden goose that is providing.
But looking at that, and sorry that I'm interrupting right here, but there's studies and things, and you might be aware of them. And I don't know where I read it, but there's a whole statistic on that. The 10% of research or innovation you do this year will contribute to about 30% of whatever over the next 2-3 years to your profit, right? Meaning that the stuff you're doing today will grow over the next few years into your new main revenue stream. And I know a lot of companies are not doing that, and that's why a lot of companies, I think, are falling behind, and eventually they're getting into the whole thing of losing customers. And I think a lot of big companies I've been working with now are all about, well, we need to do something. We need to increase the customer experience. And I look at what they're doing, and all they're doing is slightly catching up. And I keep telling them, this is not how you gain back customers, because you're not even being competitive. You're just catching up. So, and the one thing I really liked when I read the book, and the thing that popped in my head is because I know in the past, I think Troy and me here and there had conversations about what's really innovation, what's not. And you look at technology, and it's really, really hard to tell because everyone's using similar technology, so it's really hard to make a differentiator. But what you're doing is really great when you're saying, actually, the real innovation happens when you're really prepared to shift your business model. And you have a thing as well where you talk about shifting margins, right? And you give the example of, and I'm going to blow Troy's head up with that, like Ryanair, where you give an example of how they shifted their margins, and where they nearly lost money on actually flight tickets but made money somewhere else. Can you talk a little bit about that example, and generally about the innovation of shifting your business model and looking at doing the same thing but suddenly making money at different places?
Ryanair is the worst business in
Yeah.
all of Europe and the biggest airline in all of Europe. They have the worst customer experience. And all we keep hearing from all these authors is, if you don't give a good customer experience, you're going to lose your customers. And Ryanair just kills it day after day after day, and still they're in business and people still fly them. It is one of my hot buttons. He knew it when he set up the question.
See what I said?
But now I'll let you answer. Go ahead, tell us.
Great topic, right? So let's start with a few just fundamentals and reality checks data. So how do people across the world, the vast majority of people, business travelers excluding, make decisions on how to buy flight tickets? I need to go from here to here. Let me see the dates. Bam! Let me go to a search engine, a flight search engine, and then me order for cheapest price. I am going to buy the cheapest ticket. So, there's variation around this behavior, but by and large, most people will want the cheapest flight. And they think they forget it's kind of like, the experience, all these things. This is a cost for me. I need to get to this place, and it's a cost. So I want to minimize cost, and therefore you book the cheapest flight, right? And so, like 25 years ago, and companies, deregulation came, and companies realized this. And so they started undercutting themselves on price, from London to Paris, 250 euro, 200, and then the cheapest one becomes 200, and then 150, 100, and then you're reaching close to break even. You're like, 149, 148, and they're fighting to get the customer, because then you get the customer and you show them the experience and they become loyal. That was the whole theory. And then you're getting closer to the break even of our airlines starting to lose money if they sell for €1 cheaper that flight. And then somebody had the beautiful realization: I am going to cross the line of profitability, and I'm not going to cross it by €1. I'm going to put it for 99, 80, 70, 60, 50. I get the customer, and then I will try to make money from this customer through anything else that I can. Now the customer is coming to me. I know, let me offer all these services for travel service. Now the customer is, for 2 hours, 3 hours, a captive audience. Let me sell them advertising. Let me sell them products to buy. Let me sell them anything that I can, earbuds and all of these things. Why? Because I'm a monopoly in the skies. And so Ryanair's model of cross-subsidization, you lose money in one part of your business, and you make up for it in others. And by the way, this is as old as you can imagine. Supermarkets do this for a long, long time. They sell Coca-Cola cheap. They sell Heinz ketchup cheap. They sell anything that people know, they buy on price. They're always like trying to find the cheapest beer, and the supermarkets are like, well, let me just, I'll lose money with this. Then you come into my store and you buy other
Yeah,
things.
yeah, yeah. Even bars are doing that with the happy hour beers and anything.
Yeah.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
so this idea of loss leader was an airline decided, let me become a loss leader. Let me lose money on the flight and make up for it in other aspects of my business. And that was a fundamental. Airlines have had a lot of engineering innovation, but this was the first time that a huge business model innovation took hold of airlines, and other airlines around the world started copying. And now you have a bunch of Ryanairs of the world trying to get a customer, having a captive audience for a few hours, and selling them a series of other services that make up for that money. That is a business model
Okay,
innovation.
look, Southwest Airlines started it. They're one of the best high quality customer experiences, and they're one of the best low cost airlines. EasyJet tried to do it in the UK and actually delivers a good quality experience. Ryanair broke things entirely, and nobody cares.
Yeah.
We always have more questions than we have time. This is going to be our last question. I talk about value exchange a lot. What is the value exchange? What are you giving and what are you getting? And too many of the customers that I work with have never thought about their business in a value exchange business, in a term. Facebook actually has two sets of value exchanges that are going on. I have a value exchange of personal connection in return for attention, and then Facebook sells that attention to an advertiser in return for cash. Two different value exchanges. Ryanair does a value exchange of cash for transportation. And there's a whole lot of other things that they kind of psychologically abuse people until they buy popcorn and lottery tickets and earbuds and all this stuff, which has almost a zero value exchange, but they're still making it. When it comes to value exchange for businesses or for startups, large or small, do they think about their business in those terms in all of your research or not?
In short, I would say no. And that's why in my book you will not see the term value exchange. So what happens? What do? They look at what are the series of activities that customers are required to do. Like I say, they map out the customer value chain. So in the case of airlines, right, kind of you have to go online. You have to look at all of the available options. You have to choose one. You have to book. You have to fill out a form. You have to provide payment information. You have to get the ticket. Then you have to go to the airport and you fly. You wait. You fly. So on and so forth. These are all activities in the customer's value chain to get airfare, to get transported by air from one place to the other. All of these activities, and I show in my book through a series of examples, can be classified. Each activity, it can be classified into one of three. Is it a value creating activity for the customer? Is it something that this activity, if the customer does, it creates value for them? In the case of Birchbox, sampling beauty products creates value for me, even if I don't buy it, because now I know what works and not. Obviously, using beauty products, using the transportation is a value creating activity. That's why people are trying to go about it. But now there's other activities that are not creating value. They're actually eroding value from the customers. The customers have to do them, but it's a necessary evil. Me going to a Sephora store is a value eroding activity, right? Me having to stay in line at the airport is a value eroding activity. Me having to fill out all that form is a value eroding activity. If I could, I would just, through just magic, just eliminate that activity, but I'm forced to do it. And thirdly, there are value capturing activities. That's how the companies get money from me as a customer. So if you look at any company in any industry, it can be an individual, business, or government, they're forced to do value creating activities, value capturing activities, and value eroding activities, right? And so then back to your point, sort of a business model is basically figuring out what are the value creating activities that we're going to offer. Big established companies try to offer everything from end to end. If you look at these big companies, in the hotel industry and airlines, they try to offer everything for the customer, and they try to charge along the way. Startups are looking at it saying, wait, why bother? Why am I creating all this infrastructure and these costs to offer all these things? If customers are unhappy with one or two of these activities, I'm going to offer that activity better. I'm going to create a cost structure, not everything, to offer that activity, and I'm going to figure out a way to monetize, to extract value later on. But first, they separate this dual requirement in big businesses. Big businesses say, I need to create value and capture. Startups say, no, I need to create value first. Over time, I figure out how to capture. That was how Amazon did. Amazon wasn't capturing much value from consumers. It just was creating kind of a lot of customers. And later on, it learned how to do that. Uber, unprofitable. Airbnb, unprofitable, right? They weren't capturing enough value to sustain their business, meaning their cost structure was much higher than their value capturing. But they created a tremendous amount of value. And every time you go to see somebody in the business, they're like, how can we create more value? And that is their moat. Going back to one of the initial questions, you're like, how do you defend yourself? If you don't have the technology that others don't, you just use off-the-shelf technology, they can replicate. Business models are easy to replicate. We see it all the time. Why isn't anybody replicating? A lot of people replicated Birchbox. A few have tried to replicate Ryanair. But why aren't many more people replicating? They just create this goodwill with customers through creating value and creating much, much more value that they extract, such that we're very loyal. I'm extremely loyal to Airbnb. I'm extremely loyal to Netflix. If Netflix tomorrow said, I'm going to double your bill, all my family uses it all the time, I would gladly pay. I wouldn't even complain. I am getting so much more value out of Netflix than they're charging me. If they double or triple the price, I would just sign the check and let it go. But I can leave anytime I want, right? Particularly online. So my point is, to summarize, I think this idea of competitive moat, defensive, where others cannot jump into your business, I think this is a concept that worked very well in the past and allowed physical big businesses to have a lockhold on their customers. But more and more, we're going to see competition. Governments want to deregulate. It will be a free-for-all, and keep thinking of where is our moat, where is our stranglehold on our customers to bleed them to death and not allow them to leave. I think our children will basically say, what were you guys thinking? Why were you thinking in these manners? That is not how business should be done for society, for the benefit of all, and so on and so forth. So I think eventually less people will think about this as the way to keep your business.
I look forward to that day. I think it's great. Marcus, do you want to wrap up?
Yeah, I think it's really refreshing, and there's some really great insights there. And I think in general, we really have to move away from this focus of technology and understand the customer centricity, and understanding that is so much more valuable. And I'm not gonna go back to Joe Pine that we had quite some time ago, who talks about experiences and really how margins, the way it ties in, and really engages people and really looks at what people actually enjoy and do, and makes them stick to companies beyond this cookie cutter thing that has low margins. No one wants to be there anymore. Everyone would jump off that if they could, and sometimes, as you said, they can't. So, long story short, thank you, Thales, so much for all these insights, and it's really, really great look at what innovation should actually really be like, and what value chains really supply. So thank you for your time, thank you for being with us, and thank you so much for today.
My pleasure, Marcus. It was a pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for having me.
You've been listening to The Wicked Podcast with co-host Marcus Kirsch and me, Troy Norcross.
Please subscribe on Podomatic, iTunes, or Spotify. You can find all relevant links in the show notes. Please tell us your thoughts in the comment section, and let us know about any books for future episodes.
You can also get in touch with us directly on Twitter on @WickedandBeyond or @Troy_Norcross. Also, learn more about the Wicked Company book and the Wicked Company project at wickedcompany.com.